Well, Martin, we're going to talk about the rocks here first. Tell us a little bit about the circle rocks or stone circle here.
Right, this site was actually brought to my attention by somebody who formerly lived here, Malcolm Brown, who as a child grew up right here, and he contacted me and said, would you like to know where there's a standing stone circle in Papakura? I said, absolutely. So he directed me to the site and met him here, and he'd explained all about it. And it's amazing, these great boulders, they're not part of just some natural upthrust. You know, you can tell where there's a source of supply of stones that are coming up naturally. They've all been brought and plonked very individually into positions. The other thing that's interesting about them is that they are very water worn. Very close to here is a source of bluestone where they could have cut it out of the cliff. But they've obviously found stones that were down in a river and very rounded, and these are the markers that they've decided to use on this particular standing stone circle. Now the reason for them being here is you've got highly elevated views. The ground drops off very well towards the south, towards the west. There's a good equinox rise position up there at the east. And you can see round very effectively to the northwest. One little blind spot over this way. But it was with standing stone circles like this that they encoded their sciences. So when you didn't have books, very perishable books, you could encode all of your sciences in numbers. And it would be from the hubstone, you would then put a marker, a particular distance and angle out from the hubstone, and both the compass reading and the distance would give you a number. And those numbers had to relate to the lunar cycle, something to do with the equatorial size of the Earth, basically all of their sciences encoded in numbers. And they are very factorable numbers. In other words, you can double, you can quadruple, you know, you can just, the numbers that can go way up to the entire equatorial size of the Earth will be factored back right down to the last quarter of an inch. And they did this kind of encoding of their sciences from Egypt right across continental Europe, through areas of the Americas, right down into the Pacific.
Asking as a layperson now, how sure are you that these aren't random events rather than mathematical certainties?
Right. Thankfully across Europe especially, and other areas, certain individuals like Alexander Thom, who was associated with the British universities, they went out onto the sites of Britain and did very, very careful measurements. We're talking about very precise plans that are fully scaled. So we have access to them, and you take them and put them in the computer and you scale your plan perfectly. Then you can see the positions of all of the components. And from that you can work out where your hubstone is, and then the distances and angles out to other markers. Now those markers out there can be standing stones, or they can be mounds like at Avebury Henge. You've got a mixture of standing stones in Avebury itself, but outer markers composed of big obelisks or mounds dotting the country. And you can work out the distance and the angle to each, and then you start to get a recurrence of the same numbers. Sometimes you know, it'll be like a half, you know, like half a mile, or it could be a full mile if you like. And then these same measurements just reoccur from site to site to site. So then by comparative analysis, you can actually see what the people are doing. And the same holds true in North America at the Cahokia Mounds. You've got Monk's Mound, which has a base bigger than the Pyramid of Cheops. And then you've got, well, surviving about 120 small mounds dotting the landscape all around. So you go from the very centre of Monk's Mound out to that one and to that one. Oh, that's that number to do with the moon. Oh, that's that number to do with the equatorial size of the Earth. And these were great schools, open-air universities, where generations and generations of people went to learn their navigational principles. So you'll have, say for example, at Avebury Henge, you've got the dual circles within Avebury Henge, two sets of circles, but you've got an embankment all the way around the outer periphery. And the students of navigation would go there and they would look at the embankments which represented the sea horizon. And then over a period of time they'd watch stars rise, and then they'd know that another one's coming up right there in 5 minutes, and another one there, and where they would all set. And this was the training that they needed for when they were out on the ocean.
You talk a lot about the overseas, points of reference. How does it correlate to what Maori have said about, some of these things?
Right, well, those people had the principles of navigation down pat. They knew the equatorial size of the Earth, they could grid reference the Earth for successful navigation, and they could find their way here to the very ends of the Earth because they had the navigational math.
Are you talking about Māori?
I'm talking about much, much earlier people, the Patupaiarahe, Turihu type groups who could actually navigate here in their ships in remote antiquity. Yeah, I mean, there have been ships found buried in the deserts of Egypt and elsewhere that are thousands of years old. Yeah. Well, I don't think it's very strange to some people that we find these things in New Zealand, because North American history is absolutely under siege now. The academics have held everybody to a particular concept for years, but that is under major assault. The same with South American history, the same with British history. People are discovering there is far more to it than the story that we're being told. North American history especially, you've got the mound builders there, the ones who built the great geometric embankments and that all across Ohio, Pennsylvania, right across the country. Great big clusters of mounds and that. The copper culture that removed in excess of 500,000 tons of copper, pure grade copper, from the areas of the Great Lakes, and all of it left the Americas. It was transported. I think it fed the European Bronze Age, North American copper. But there seems to be a hush-hush of all of that information. So far as I know, something like 30,000 stones have been found over there with scripts on them, many of them readable, Minoan and Ogham, and they can't all be explained away as plough marks from some plough, and people are just sick to death of not getting the real history.